really the biggest thing is this is where the ROI comes in, right? You do the first meeting, you do it well, you get the statements, you're in the second meeting, you did what you needed to do. You found out what their problems were, you applied the solutions that you can offer to them. You're giving them the problem, they're holding it right now. Well, how do I actually get this person to either sign the agreements, pay for the financial plan, start the ACAT? Like, what's the process of moving the needle and actually getting a prospect to become a client?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this is where what we've built for the entire time. We're looking to get clients to make commitments around significant change in their life. And we have to remember, as advisors, it is significant change in their life. And you have to understand the process of change, the psychology of resistance. People are always predisposed to continuing to do the things that they've always done. So if that's the predisposition, when people come up to us all the time and they say, like, how do you handle an objection? Well, first of all, I'm not looking to handle objections. I'm looking to help people solve their problems. The objection isn't the issue. The issue is the real problem. The issue is that you're going to run out of money before you run out of breath. That's the issue. You have this objection of, well, I've never paid for advice. Well, that I understand that. That's real and that's new to you. In order to help people move through new processes, we have to show them the pathway, what it's going to look like on the other side. And this is where creating a reality check and the other side, future pacing opportunities come in. So the first thing is ensuring that before you come to any close, whether it's the close to get statements, the close to move forward to the next meeting, or the close to write out, actually sign the check, actually ACAT the forms, there should be a reality check. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we've been working together for the last 2.5 weeks to identify these issues. We actually uncovered more things than you expected were going to be there, and the solutions are relatively easy to apply. The reality is, if we don't move forward with this, you continue to hold all the same problems that you came in with. And there is no better option. We explored, walk through the things that you explored, as we talked about in previous calls, of walking them down the hallway, helping them see what's good in this room, why it doesn't work. So what we've come to is, ultimately, I've built the plan that works for you. So let's go ahead and get this started. And then be quiet. Give space for people to process. I think too often advisors get caught in a space of trying to over defend and over explain themselves. Lay the groundwork for what you've done, the reality check that if they don't move forward, they continue holding all the problems, and give them the opportunity to solve the problem. When you sign this over, and I literally said this on my last close, listen, when we do all these documents, Mrs. Smith, you no longer have to have that anxiety of how the money is going to last. That's my problem. You just come to me and ask me how we're solving it, and I'll have your answers. And you could see the stress level move down. And by the way, Mr. Smith, in this case, was very confident that everything was going to last. Mrs. Smith, as typical, was a little bit more anxious about the process. And so Mrs. Smith got her anxiety level dropped of knowing that I'm dealing with it. And Mr. Smith got taken off the hook for holding her anxiety. So and I told him that, I turned to him and I said, Mr. Smith, now that this is done, when Mrs. Smith starts feeling concerned, you say, well, let's call Jason. You no longer have to defend the choices made inside of this portfolio. Let's call Jason. He'll walk us through it.
Mm-hmm.
So now what I did is I future paced. So we first reality check to where we are, and then we future pace to what they get to experience. In this case, it was a relief of anxiety that was driving the whole meeting. And I knew that from 2.5 weeks prior. So you got to frame your solution in the context of the problem. The context of the problem for this household was anxiety. It wasn't even really that they were going to run out of money. They already, between pensions and Social Security, meet about 85%, 90% of their monthly spend. And they've got over $2 million that they need to generate roughly $3,000, $4,000 from. They were going to be well taken care of. Every scenario I ran for them, long-term care issue, downturn of 22, downturn of 08, every stress test we ran showed them coming out positive. Now, some of the positive numbers were, 4 or 5 million. Some of the positive numbers were 200,000, but they were never going to run out of money. As long as they continue to keep their frugal lifestyle, which I actually forced them to put a higher number in so that it looked even more realistic for them, it was never actually the money. It was the anxiety. So we have to understand what problems we're solving. And when you solve the right problem, the close is easy. But if I focused on the dollar amount, the low fee, the great strategy, there would have been a disconnect for this client.
Mhm. And I think one thing you're stating, right, when you're talking about that close is you're confident. I think a lot of advisors, it's almost so based on all we've talked about in the strategy, what do you guys think, right? You're kind of giving them the almost choice, or just throwing it to them like, hey, I guess, do you want to work with me? And every prospect's innate response, for the most part, is going to be a little bit of skepticism. Should I do it? I don't know. I have to make this change. I got to do this. And so when you give them not the option, because obviously they can say no, they can go their separate ways. Maybe it doesn't make sense for them. But when you don't show confidence in your ability to help them, and you're saying, hey, so yeah, let's get this going, or let's get this started. We'll get this taken care of, like you were saying, and addressing those problems that you're solving for them. The prospect is going, that's when you get those, I need to think about it, right? It's them pushing that pressure off themselves and kind of delaying it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great point there, Joe. Because one of the things that as advisors we have to get better at doing is appropriately pacing the conversation and pacing the entire sales process, especially in a virtual environment where you don't have the human contact element. In the virtual environment, it's critical that you don't rush to the close. And in fact, I've had a mentor work with me in my sales process, and one of the things that we inserted in is the question meeting. So meeting one is traditionally discovery, meeting two traditionally presentation, meeting three is traditionally the close. Well, what I've done is inserted a question meeting before the close,
Mm.
and it actually moves the objection handling out of the close positioning. And it doesn't make me, it shows that I am the consultant working on their benefit. So at the end of meeting two, the direction to them is, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, here's what you need to do. Your homework for today's meeting is to review the things that I've gone over with you. We've sent you out the packet. Look over that and write down every question that comes to mind for you. As you're writing down those questions, we are going to get back together in 2 days. This is a meeting that I would say try and get it as close as possible. Typically, I say you want to give them a lot of time, but when you're actually letting them work through the questions, they don't need that much time. They're instinctual questions more often than not. And you don't want to let this linger, right? Because now they start like asking their brother-in-law and their sister Susie and that one guy who made a lot of money, and all kinds of other influences come in. But I would try and keep this meeting a little bit tighter to your original. So we'll get back together in 2 days. At that time, you're going to ask me every question because every rock should be uncovered. Everything should be looked at. Once we review those questions, only then do you have the information you need to make a decision. So that's the question meeting. Okay. Now, about 70% of the time at the end of the question meeting, they're ready to write paperwork. When they're not, you'll feel it, and you're not going to let them say, I need to think about it. You're going to say the next step in the process is we get back together on Friday and we walk through the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
Now, between now and Friday, what are they going to do? Think about it. Thinking about it isn't that bad of a concept. I mean, let's be honest. They've worked 40 years to achieve this account. And you want them to make a decision from one meeting to the next or on a virtual call with you? That's not always the case. What you don't want to happen is for them to have the power of saying, I'm pushing you off. No, the next step in the process is, now that you've answered all your questions, is we get back together on Friday for opening the paperwork. Between now and Friday, they're going to think about it. Okay? And that's for that last 30% of people that don't just close through the questioning meeting. But what it does is when you tell people, hey, this is the time for you to ask questions, it shows them that you're not pressuring. And that question meeting helps them to relieve tension, relieve pressure. Now, I highly recommend you come to that questioning meeting with all your docs pre-prepped. So if you're doing ACATs, get all the forms ready to go, and all you need to do is plug in Social Security, account numbers, beneficiaries, and you can be in and out of that system in 5 minutes and send them the docs while you're on the phone. And you go through it, you sign the paperwork. Mm-hmm. So what I think about it is the objection needs to be segmented. You give them the space where it's not an objection handling meeting. It's a questioning meeting, because they're not against me and I'm not against them. We're working together to solve the problem. So you don't want them to feel as if they're coming up with things that are going to throw you off of your game. You want them to feel as if they're participating in discovering how this is going to work for them. Another great tool in this is towards the end of meeting 2. And I know we're not just sticking in one solid meeting, because properly handling objections happens all throughout the process. In fact, as we've said so many times, it often starts at the foundation. Are you laying the right foundation, elevating status, being the consultant, being the leader? But at the end of meeting 2, a great value is to ask the client to explain back the solution to you. You just walked them through the solution. And hopefully you've done so in a way that's easy to understand and easy to take action on. They don't need to know how the watch is made. They need to know what time it is. And they need to be able to repeat back to you what time it is. Even if you click back through your slides and say, okay, there were 3 key slides that we really went over that ultimately solved the problem for you. Can you look? I just want to make sure I've done my job of explaining this to you. It's very important that you put that emphasis on you, because you don't want them to feel like you're quizzing them. Mm-hmm. You want them to be acting as a quality check. Hey, I just want to do a little quick communication check here. I went over 3 key slides that ultimately solved the problem for you throughout this whole period, and I want to make sure I communicated those to you properly. So let's look at slide 15 here. What do you recall from this slide? What's the solution being offered here? Let them talk it through. Now you're going to be able to solve some of the questions that they have, by the way. Now you're going to be able to hear some of the objections, and you're also going to find out, holy smokes, they didn't hear anything that I said on that slide. And that's one of my key slides. If they don't get this, they're not going to get the next part of the process. So you go to the next part of your process. Hey, so maybe this is in your software. So this is tab 4, and you remember what we did here on tab 4. How does that benefit you? Get them to talk it through. You're now using the neuroscience of their own brain to draw in their memory, right? Because we remember more of what we repeat. You remember what you repeat. You remember what's repeated to you. So if you can get them to repeat what you've said, you're going to increase their memory of, again, one of these 3 key places that you are that you need them to focus on over this next couple of days. And you take them through these processes, you confirm understanding. That's great. Sounds like you really understand this. I'm sure that there's going to be more things that come up for you. I want you to review everything we've sent, and we're going to get back together on Thursday to answer those questions. So a lot of it comes in the setup. Who's owning that process? Mm-hmm. We can't feel as though an objection is fearful. People have objections because they're processing big change. You should be the expert in helping people process change. Might not be a bad idea to buy some books on processing change and gain an understanding of how people do that and what helps reduce the resistance to change.
Yeah. And that's the science right there, the neuroscience. But it's interesting you say that, because we have even a case study with one of our advisors who he talks about, and this is before we did any sales training, before we even dabbled in the sales side of things. It's probably a year ago. He was like, yeah, one thing I really noted worked extremely well was I extended one extra meeting, exactly what you were saying, of like a question meeting, because he was like, it's different than when you're meeting in person. They're going to have those questions. You don't have the connection. You kind of let them get what's on their chest off, right? And just, here's the things I had. And when you do it in that way, they don't feel like it's not after you've already told them, so here's the next step of getting started. Because then their defense mechanisms are just innately going to come up a little bit when you do that. So they're not going to give you the real truths a lot of time, or questions that they really have, because maybe they don't actually want you to solve them, or they're nervous, whatever it is. Versus when you have that mapped out kind of period for questions, they're able to just openly say it, because you haven't even talked about necessarily moving forward yet. And so it's interesting you say that's a part too. And I think a big thing, right, with the confidence and not objection handling, because I know it has such a bad connotation to it in terms of just, oh, you're objection handling, you must be a slimy salesman. But I think sales is only slimy, and it's only bad when you aren't selling something or offering a service that genuinely helps people. And even for myself with what we do, the moment I look back and I look at it, case studies, or I look at the results and I go, man, we really help people. Now, I'm not trying to objection handling to trick you. I'm trying to genuinely, like you said, help you make that change that's going to help you improve your life, help you, grow your business, help you make sure your money lasts. And that's the big change, I think, in mindset a lot of times, is just understanding that's why people get nervous when they're objection handling. And that's a normal thing as a human. If you're a good human, no one likes the salesy thing. You don't want to make it feel like you're getting someone to make a decision they're not making themselves. But what you're doing is just helping them see that decision, because you're genuinely helping them make that change that's going to better their lives. I think that's a big thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if your process, product, or service sucks, then you shouldn't be selling it. Mm-hmm. But when it changes people's lives, gives them confidence for the long term, you shouldn't fear selling it. Like, think about it. Nike doesn't have a problem running hundreds of thousands of ads every day to sell their product, because they know they have the top product in the world. And by the way, neither does Under Armour, because they know they have the top product in the world. And if you don't have that same level of belief to know that when you're sitting in front of a prospect, there is no other there is no other advisor on the planet who could do a better job for them than you're going to do for them right now. Maybe it's because you're young and hungry and you have enough time to give to them and they need that. Maybe it's because you're experienced and have the ability to do this in your sleep. Whatever it is, you are the answer to their problem and they are lucky to be in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that level of confidence, you can speak clearly that Mr. and Mrs. Client, we've evaluated all the options. At the end of the day, based on what you've told me, there is no better way to do this. Let's get it done.
Mm-hmm. And that's that confidence because you know that you're good at what you do and that you can provide a great service. So I think that's uh, a huge thing as well because I see so many advisors just and it's sometimes as newer advisors who maybe don't have as much experience, but they're just not sure. And I think that's also just the nature of you're so used to referrals where, well, referral a lot of times you don't have to put any pressure. You don't have to really show them the change. They're kind of like, hey, yeah, all right, cool. What's the next steps? They ask you, what are the next steps? You're so used to being able to sit in this passive stance of, all right, ask me what the next steps are so I can tell you what to do rather than showing people what the next steps are. And I think that's a huge thing
Yeah.
as well. But no, I think you're right. It all does just come down to the discovery, the solutions you're providing, that all leads up to that. Because if you, and also a big thing too, when people are looking at what are the common objections you're getting, maybe you're doing something. You should be able to look back and say, hey, I keep getting this objection about XYZ. What in my process am I doing wrong that people are still questioning this part or they're still unsure about this part? How can I change that so they don't really have this question anymore? That's just being a good business owner, anyone,
Business person. Yeah.
yeah, you're just learning from what you're doing. So I think that's something because a lot of times I feel like advisors don't want to change their processes, especially once they've already done it for a little bit and found some level of success. They're very set in their ways of, well, I've done this before, it's worked before, it should work again. It must be an issue with this prospect, or this prospect was a tire kicker, or they just, they weren't serious. I think that's a big uh, deflecting kind of stance people will take when they're struggling with kind of converting at a higher rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, I guess any last on this topic, any last little tidbits or things, or I think that was a pretty good cover of that side of the sales process.
Yeah. I would just wrap it up with the cleanest idea is objections aren't to you or your process, they are to change in and of itself. And you are responsible to give them a reason to change. A solution cannot exist outside of the context of the problem. The problem is the reason to change. So when you present your solution, ensure that you're presenting it in the context of the problem. You said you have a concern about X. This solves it by 1, 2, 3. The other concern you said you had was why. This solves it because of 4, 5, 6. And now the last objection that you had virtually disappears because 1 and 2 are taken care of so much that you have excess in your accounts to be able to absorb that risk. So, Mr. and Mrs. Client, we've looked at every angle of this problem for you, and the solution is pretty easy to apply. Let's go ahead and get started.
Hmm. Well said, like a true philosopher. Well, awesome. I think that's a good wrap up, and yeah, it's a pleasure as always.
Love to be here. Let's get some wins.
Mm-hmm.